Good morning, Mr. Secretary, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rob Mosbacher. I have the privilege of being chairman of the Energy Action Group at the Council of the Americas, and it's a great privilege to be here with Secretary Moniz. Secretary Moniz, as you know, has been at the Energy Department, but it's not his first tour of duty at the Energy Department. He was, I think, an undersecretary of Energy.
The undersecretary.
The undersecretary.
Well, there was only one.
When was that? No, that was 1997 to 2001. But he's had extremely distinguished career as a professor at MIT, has been a part of so many different issues. His background is all about engineering and physics, and so he brings great knowledge to a complicated subject in energy. Now, Mr. Secretary, I come out of the thermal side of the business. The biggest development in the thermal side of the energy world is the collapse of oil prices, and I wonder if we could start by asking you how you see the impact of that collapse on the Americas.
Good, Rob. Although, first of all, I think I'm not sure I would use the word collapse as opposed to.
That's what it looks like to us.
I understand. As opposed to obviously a price that reflects the current supply and demand situation, and of course, as you know, the price has been perhaps firming a little bit in the last days. But clearly, obviously, we're down a factor of 2 nearly from not so long ago. I think the effects are quite varied. For one thing, by the way, on the global stage, of course, people tend to forget that it has a strong influence on LNG prices in many parts of the world, and that may change the dynamic here in the United States and how we work with our neighbors in terms of natural gas exports, in terms of the oil price reduction. Clearly, one thing which has very substantial hemispheric implications is the situation in Venezuela in terms of their economy, and that in turn has a major impact on an area that the President and the Vice President have spent a lot of time on recently, which is the Caribbean. Obviously, there's an opportunity, I would say now, to really look at fuel diversification, including natural gas, because they have been dependent on oil for electricity and pay very, very high prices. So that's actually an area that we at DOE are also spending a lot of time. In fact, we've just published, I was in Jamaica with the President a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was, and we've published from DOE, for example, a playbook for islands based upon our experience in Hawaii and the Virgin Islands. So a lot happening, well, I'll let you ask the next question. I was going to say, in my stream of consciousness, of course, we also come very much to the climate equation, and there, on the one hand, you have Mexico, which has just made a very strong declaration of greenhouse gas emission intent, but also going back to the islands, a huge issue on adaptation and resilience because of their exposure to extreme weather. Anyway, it's a long way around, but I think...
no, that's very helpful. And in terms of opportunities for integration, you mentioned the Caribbean as an area where you all have focused a great deal of attention, but in terms of building stronger alliances, stronger cooperative opportunities, what do you see going on at the moment, and what do you think is in prospect in the years ahead?
Well, of course, by the way, I'm going to advertise that this afternoon with the Vice President, we'll be releasing something called the Quadrennial Energy Review. That's relevant because its focus is on energy infrastructure, and there is a specific chapter on North American integration because obviously we already have extraordinary linkages with Canada in particular, both in the hydrocarbons and electricity. For example, Quebec Hydro features very, very large in terms of carbon-free electricity going forward, especially in the Northeast. But with Mexico, let me turn to Mexico, because there, I think the reform in Mexico, and not only the hydrocarbon sector, but I think that gets more attention, but actually the electricity sector reform is going to open up, I think, tremendous integration opportunities as the business models and the regulatory structures align much more closely with U.S. practice. That will give a lot of opportunity for integration. So we are working with Mexico in a variety of ways, with the Energy Ministry, but also just recently our presidents, following the Mexican climate declaration, established a new joint panel. I'm chairing the American side of that, which will look at policy, regulatory, and technology cooperation for both our countries to meet our ambitious carbon goals. So we just met on Sunday for the first time, and it's a broad agenda. One other area, in fact, I just mentioned, the head of our Energy Information Administration, Adam Szyminski, was just down in Mexico. We're also going to be looking at data and modeling integration to understand our energy systems and their integrative possibilities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And a key part of integration would presume that there's significant knowledge sharing. And to the extent possible where there's non-proprietary technologies, either on the renewable side or on the hydrocarbon side, that those are shared. Do you see this, particularly as an educator for all your life, do you see this as a moment where there can be unparalleled sharing of knowledge?
Absolutely. In fact, well, first of all, this data and modeling activity is one part of knowledge sharing and establishing a common foundation for understanding the energy systems and the revolution. In terms of direct collaboration, I'll just mention one example. You say where proprietary issues are not dominant. I think I can say on Sunday, for example, I mentioned this first meeting. One of the areas which is a long-term outlook that our Mexican colleagues raised for collaboration is on methane hydrates in the Gulf of Mexico, and that has both resource implications in the long term and safety implications in the near term in terms of producing in the Gulf of Mexico. Also, in this quadrennial energy review coming out today, one of the recommendations in the North American chapter is in fact just what you alluded to, a recommendation for dramatically increasing collaboration, for example, between academic institutions and driving both the policy and the technology agendas. And again, I'll just mention one other thing. I mentioned it in the context of the Caribbean, but also with our Mexican colleagues, tremendous interest in not looking only at climate change mitigation actions, but also at the adaptation issues. In particular, we share in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, a lot of exposure to extreme weather threatening our energy infrastructures. Just as it's either amusing or sad as to how you might look at it. But when I look back at a map that we had of coastal risk to extreme weather, it was remarkable how the hurricane damage just ended at the U.S.-Mexican border. It's fantastic. So we are now going to extend those maps to have a more integrated view of what's a common risk.
Wonderful. And those of you who are on the sort of research side of new technologies, when you think of renewable energy and you think of what we today think of as the principal renewable energy options, how do you see those developing and how do you see them impacting the price of electricity, for instance, as the technology evolves? And are there new technologies that you think can become cost effective in our lifetime that can be fundamental?
Right. Well, one of our expressions at DOE, and we have a little paper on our website that I invite you all to look at, is called Revolution ... now. And the message is that, I think a lot of us have gotten into a habit of thinking about renewables as the revolution of 10 years from now. And now we're saying, no, it's actually, we are in the revolution. And that's being driven by the cost reduction of these technologies. If you take photovoltaics, for example, the holy grail for PV modules has been 50 cents a watt. We are already down into the 70s, and my prediction is we will be below 50 cents a watt within a few years. Just gives you an idea that the impact of these and the deployment is going up. In this administration, the Obama administration, the deployment of solar in this country has gone up by more than 20-fold. And it's the cost reduction that has been driving that. There are, of course, incentives and policies, but without the cost reduction, it would not work. And the same story is true for wind. The same story is true for LED lighting. The same story is true for batteries for electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles. In that case, there's still a ways to go, another factor of 2 or 3 in cost, but it's come down by a factor of that in just a few years. Now, so those are all areas that are critically important, but another area certainly of relevance to Mexico in particular and also to the eastern Caribbean islands is geothermal, another area. And if you like, traditional geothermal, certainly also in this country, in California and Nevada, is a major source. But just last week, we announced DOE, the first step in a major effort to get ultimately the costs down of what we call engineered geothermal systems, deep hot rock systems, which can be much more geographically diverse. So there's just work across the board, and innovation in this space is about cost reduction. And frankly, in the climate context, I believe it is the cost reduction of clean energy technologies that ultimately will help the policy get over the top.
One of the clean energy options is nuclear. What is it going to take to get new investment in nuclear done in a timely way, or is that possible given what's going on today?
Well, I'd say there are two things. The one thing is that, well, particularly with regard to existing nuclear plants, as you probably know, we've had a handful shut down, largely driven by the low natural gas price in the United States. One issue is that, and we say this again in this quadrennial energy review, that we need to, on the regulatory front, value different kind of services more appropriately. We've had a traditional kilowatt hour kind of regulatory structure in most parts of the country, at least, and there are various other values. I mean, capacity value, fuel diversification value, et cetera. So that is one issue. But frankly, the number one issue is, I've said this many times today already, cost. If the cost and schedule performance of new reactors has to, frankly, get better. That's number one. Number two is there are alternative technologies that could become very important. In particular, we are excited about at least learning the cost performance of what are called small modular reactors. The history of recent decades has been to go to larger and larger units for a so-called economy of scale. Of course, economy of scale also brings a scale of any mistakes made in the construction. Small modular reactors go in the opposite direction, literally as small as, say, 50 megawatts reactors. And the idea is that an economy of manufacturing may make up for the loss of economy of scale. We don't know until we test the proposition, so we are supporting, in fact, the licensing of the first of these small modular reactors, and we hope in the early 20s we'll be able to test the proposition. That could be a very interesting direction, going to, say, 50 to 200 megawatt units rather than these 1,600 megawatt units, for example.
Despite the challenges from a carbon standpoint of coal, coal exists in many parts of the world where there really are no other options, at least indigenous. What's your view of clean coal technology? Some people think it's an oxymoron. Some people think it's something that will ultimately become cost effective. What's your feeling about that?
Well, first of all, we make, we, Department of Energy, and actually the U.S. government, we make a huge set of investments in trying to drive the technology agenda for coal in a low-carbon world. Now, that is mainly involves carbon dioxide capture and sequestration, but typically today with utilization of the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. It's not that well known that today we produce around 300,000 barrels per day using CO2 tertiary recovery, if you like. Now, most of that CO2 today is natural CO2, but to scale that up, we will need the CO2 actually from power plants and industrial plants. So we're working again, cost reduction on the capture side is critical. But another point is very important. There's been a lot of confusion over, for example, the EPA proposed rule for new coal power plants. And what we have pointed out is that if you want to comply with the proposed rule for new power plants, the first thing you should do is start with an ultra supercritical plant. In other words, the most efficient plant that you can have. I mean, they certainly exist. We're not talking about some pie in the sky. If you start with that plant to comply with that rule, you only have to capture 30% of the CO2. And these statements about, huge cost, et cetera, are based upon capturing essentially all the CO2. So in reality, we're talking about a pretty modest, if you start with that ultra efficient plant, with a fairly modest cost differential to do the capture and sequestration relative to coal without capture. But of course, what you're competing against is not that in a low carbon world. You're competing against other technologies like nuclear, et cetera.
Right.
So we think there is definitely a significant role for coal in a low carbon world.
Right. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your time. This has been very enlightening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I gave it 20 minutes. I'm trying to stick to it.